and how they messed up so bad. And he says, don't do this anymore, right? Don't mess up so bad. And he restated the law, the 10 Commandments. And we went over those, and he said, keep the 10 Commandments, keep the 10 Commandments, keep the 10 Commandments. And he keeps saying this over and over because he's going to be saying it again today because they're getting ready to go in, and he wants them to do well. But if they don't follow God's rules, they're not going to do well. All right? And we'll see that. So Deuteronomy chapter 8, verse 1, it says this, all the commandments, how many of them? All the commandments which I command you this day you will observe to do. Why? That you may live. That word live really means to live well. Okay? And multiply, so that you may live well and multiply and go in and possess the land which the Lord swore to your fathers. The promised land. Right? That the Lord swore to Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, the fathers of Israel. He swore that they would that would happen, that they would go in and take that. And King David knew that as well. So on King David's deathbed, he was talking to Solomon, who was king, taking his place. And he said, now the days of David drew near that he should die. And he charged Solomon. I mean, he gave him, this is what you need to do. That's a charge. Solomon, his son, saying, I go the way of all the earth. Did you know we're all going to do that, by the way? We're all going to go the way of earth, which means you're all going to die, including me. We can't stop it. In fact, I can't stop my body from degenerating now. I used to be able to do that somewhat, but now it just goes and gets worse and worse and worse. Yeah, well, that I might call that regenerating. but for degenerating, you go all the way to the earth. So David tells Solomon, be strong. And that's what we need to do in a day and age that we're in, right? We need to be strong and show yourself a man. I love that. That means stand up for right, stand up for truth, stand up for what you know is right. If everyone would do that, like the truckers in Canada, people will take notice. But we all got to do it together. It can't be an individual here and an individual here and an individual here. We all got to stand strong together and say, no, we're not going for that. And he goes on and he tells Solomon, he says, and keep the charge of the Lord. See, they even knew 1,000 years later. The Lord made a charge to Israel. He made a commandment. That's what that word means. He commanded them to do this. Keep the charge of the Lord your God, to walk in his ways, to keep his statutes and his commandments and his judgments and his testimonies. All those, right? Your statutes, those are the rules that are laid out on how to keep the commandments. The commandments, we know what those are. The 10 Commandments, that's what he gave them. He gave them the 10 Commandments. He didn't give them any more. The rest of it's all the rules and statutes on how to keep the commandments. This is the way you do it. And his judgments. In other words, that what God deems as a sin is a sin. What God says you do for capital murder, that's what you do. You have capital punishment, right? He said if someone takes a man's life on purpose, that man should die. That's what he said. And he said you need to keep that. You need to keep God's judgment. That's God's judgment. I think he knows best. And his testimonies, his witnesses. This is what's going to happen when you do this. And as it is written in the law of Moses, that you may prosper in all that you do. The reason God gave the commandments to his people was so that they would prosper in everything they do. And they would have if they had done that. But we know that they didn't do that. But that word prosper means to have success, to do good in all that you do if you would just do that. Well, we get the same thing, guys. If we would just follow God's commandments, we can just follow the New Testament commandments if you want. because they're the same as the Old Testament ones. All right? But and it says that the Lord may continue his word which he spoke concerning me, saying, if your children take heed to their way to walk before me in truth with all their heart and with all their soul, they will not fail you, said he, a man on the throne of Israel. And that would have been true, but guess what happened to Israel? They didn't do that. They kept falling away, and then they'd come back, and they'd fall away, and they'd come back. Even in the judge's time, or the judges' time, before they had kings, they would do the same thing. They would fall away, and then they would come back, and they'd fall away, and then they would come back. And luckily, God is a very merciful, patient, and loving God, and gave them, and he still is giving them a chance. And they're still going to be his people in the future, his earthly people. I want you guys to understand that, his earthly people, not his heavenly people, his earthly people. And you'll see that in Revelation. They're still on the earth, but guess who isn't? We're not. We're his heavenly people, and we'll see that here in a little bit as well. So he goes on in verse 2 and 3, and he says, and you shall remember all the way which the Lord your God led you. Remember all the way which the Lord your God led you these 40 years in the wilderness, to humble you and to test you, to know what was in your heart, whether you would keep his commandments or not. Isn't that interesting? God gave the Israelites a time of testing. That's what why else would they wander 40 years in the wilderness? He wanted to test them to see if their heart was really in with him. By the way, they lost. They didn't do very well in that, but luckily, again, he's a merciful. But I like, it says, and you shall remember all the way which the Lord your God led you. What all did he do for them in the wilderness? He protected them. He kept them. You know that their feet didn't even swell, that their shoes didn't wear out. Wandering 40, have you seen that land where they were wandering? It's rocky, it's dry, it's pathetic. And yet they didn't get swollen feet or their shoes didn't wear out. I think that's pretty good. Are there clothes? Yeah. Yeah, none of it, and it's just pretty amazing. And he said, I tested you to see whether you would keep the commandments or not. And he humbled you and allowed you to hunger, and he fed you with manna. See how it says he allowed you to hunger? Why did he allow them to hunger? Testing their faith. Why does he allow us to have bad times in our life? The ones, yeah, right? Yeah, but even before that, they were doing that, right? And he fed you with manna, which you knew not, so he did a pretty amazing thing there. And neither did your fathers know, that he might make you know that man does not live by bread only, but by what? Every word that proceeds out of the mouth of the Lord does man live. Food doesn't matter. I mean, it does, but it's needful, but it doesn't matter. But what God tells you to do and how to live, that is what matters. To have a good and successful life. That's why he gave the commandments. That's why the New Testament is full of the commandments on how to live your life so that you have a good, successful life that glorifies God. That's the purpose. You remember Jesus quoted that verse, by the way. Do you remember that? When the tempter came to him and said, if you are the Son of God, command that these stones be made bread. Now this was after he had been in the wilderness 40 days and 40 nights without water, without food. Do you think you'd be hungry? Yeah. But he answered and he said to Satan, it is written, and we just saw where it was written, man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds out of the mouth of God. You see, and when Satan tempts us, we need to say the same thing. Yeah, stuff's going bad, but that doesn't matter. We don't live on bread alone. We live on our faith in our God. And every word that he says, and we can trust him. Peter said, in 1 Peter 6, our chapter 1, verses 6 and 7, he said, in which you greatly rejoice, though now for a little while, if need be, you are in heaviness, that means sad, through manifold trials. Manifold trials means various, different kinds of trials. Did you know we all have different kinds of trials? We don't all have the same ones. Sometimes we do, but we don't. We all have different things that we go through, and trials that are in our life. They're various. They're manifold, is what that word means. And so they're manifold trials. That the trial, the testing, that word trial there means testing. The first word, manifold trials, it means putting to the proof. I'm testing you. The second one is a different word, and it means to see if your faith is real, if trustworthy. So that second word for trial, even though it's the same up in our English language, it means a little different in the Greek. And so that the trial, the proof of your faith, you could even put in there, being much more precious than gold that perishes, though it be tried with fire, might be found to praise and honor and glory at the appearing of Jesus Christ. So our faith as believers is tested. Do you think we're going through a testing right now with everything that's happening in the world, and how Christians are being put down and we're the problem, and blah, 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 and they don't want us to speak, they don't want to hear what we say, all that? That's a testing of our faith. Just one, and we all kind of share that one. But we all have things individually in our lives that happen, right? Some people have their children die early, right? That's a testing of the faith. Some people get thrown in jail. That's a testing of the faith. So, I mean, there's all kinds of things that test our faith. And God says, I'm testing your faith to see if it's real or not. And what I've seen in my life is that many people fail that test. I've seen people turn away from God because of trials in their life when they should be coming closer to God through the trials in their life. He did, and he won't. But still, the people with faith that isn't genuine turn away. And so James said this for us as well, and this is really hard, but he kind of said the same thing Peter just said, right? He said, count it all joy. Rejoice. That's what that word joy means. Rejoice when you fall into various temptations. Well, I don't know. Peter said you have a heavy heart, all right? That you're kind of sad, and it does do that. Knowing this, and this is why you're to rejoice, that the trying of your faith does something. It works patience. Blessed, that means happy, is the man that endures temptation, that gets through it. For when he is tried, he will receive the crown of life. You see, people like to think earthly. The crown of life is heavenly. And when we focus on our heavenly rewards instead of what's happening here on earth, you should be rejoicing. You have the crown of life, which the Lord has promised to those that love him. That's what we should focus on during trials and temptations, is I have eternal life. I have the crown of life. I'm going to be in heaven. What am I going to live here, 80, 90 years maybe? If I'm lucky, like Dolly, I'll get to 90. I don't know if I will or not, but it doesn't matter. That's all I'm going to have. After that comes eternity, an eternity in heaven. That sounds good to me. So whatever happens down here, I need to rejoice, because it's just working rewards and glory for God, really, in heaven. And that's a great thing. So as you go back to Deuteronomy, Moses keeps giving them this pep talk. He said, your clothing didn't grow old on you, remember? Neither did your foot swell these 40 years. You will also consider in your heart that as a man chastens his son. Did any of you guys ever discipline your kids? Yeah. As a man chastens his son, so the Lord your God chastens you. See? Why did you discipline your children? Because you hate them? You just want to be mean to them? To teach them something. Because you love them and you want them to succeed in life. And he keeps telling them this thing about remembering too, which we'll talk a little bit more about in a minute. But think about, how did God bring you to where you are? We need to dwell on that. This is what I was, and look where God has brought me. Right? Because he's a loving God and a merciful God. I deserved to perish a long time ago. But God brought me through. And it's good for us to go and look at our past and remember where we've come from and to where God has brought us. And yeah, it's been through some trials and some temptations and some rough stuff. Because that's what God does. And he chastens those and those that he loves. In fact, Hebrews in the New Testament has a whole passage about that. And we're going to read that. And he says, and have you forgotten the exhortation which speaks to you as children, my son? Despise not. That means don't take lightly the chastening of the Lord. Or faint. Sometimes I feel like I can't take any more, right? When you are rebuked, that means when you are told you're messing up, you need to straighten up. That's what that means. For the Lord for whom the Lord loves, he what? Chastens. That word chasten there, it means flogs. That's the Greek word for flogging. In other words, he smacks you around pretty good sometimes. The other word for chastening, where it says despise not the chastening, that one means to train up a child in the way he should go. Okay? But the other one means, and he scourges every son whom he receives. How many of them? Every one. If you endure chastening, God deals with you as with sons. For what son is he whom the Father chastens not? But if you are without chastisement, if you haven't been chastened by God, of which all are partakers, if you haven't, because all are partakers, then you are illegitimate children and not sons at all. That word illegitimate means you are fatherless. And you know, there's a word that we use for that, and I won't say it, but there's a word that we use for that, or at least that we used to. But you are illegitimate children. We don't know who your father is, but it sure isn't me. Okay? And not sons. Furthermore, we have had fathers of our flesh who corrected us, and we gave them reverence. Shall we not much rather be in subjection to the Father of spirits and live? For they, the earthly fathers, barely for a few days chastened after their own pleasure, they did it for our God does it for our profit, benefit, that we might be partakers of his holiness. Now no chastening for the present seems to be joyous. You guys love going through that chastening? God smacking you around a little bit, this and that? No. But grievous, in fact. That means not fun at all. No, I sure didn't. Nevertheless, afterward, it yields the peaceable fruit of righteousness to those who are trained by it. In other words, it teaches you how to live right. That's the purpose of God chastening us. Okay? And he does it because he loves us. The Lord, whom the Lord loves, he chastens. And that's all over the place. In Revelation 3:19, as many as I love, I rebuke. That means all. Every one of us at some point is rebuked by the Lord and chastened. And does it say give up because of that? No, it says what? Be zealous, go for it the right way, and repent of what you were doing wrong. When we are judged, we are chastened by the Lord. Who's our judge? God is, right? Do you know I'm not really your judge? Even as an elder, I'm not your judge. I might judge your actions, but I'm not going to judge you. God judges you. Yeah. And there's a reason for it. And then we're chastened of the Lord that we should not be condemned with the world. See? We're his children. And he doesn't want us to be condemned with the world. The same reason we chastened and disciplined our children. Because we didn't want them to follow the world and be condemned with the world. And so we tried to keep them from doing that. And we disciplined and punished them and chastened them so that that wouldn't happen. He goes on back in Deuteronomy, giving them this pep talk. He says, therefore, you shall keep the commandments of the Lord your God to walk in his ways and to fear him. This is what you are to do. You are to keep the commandments. He keeps saying this. Have you noticed that? Over and over and over. And we're going to hear it all through Deuteronomy because he is leaving. And he wants them to understand this, that they need to follow God. And I want us to understand this, that we need to follow God. Jesus said that very clear, right? Follow me. And as we go on here, he goes on, for the Lord your God brings you into a good land, a land of brooks of water, of fountains, and depths that spring out of the valleys and hills. A land, boy, it's not like that anymore, is it? You'd almost think they messed it up. A land of wheat and barley and vines and fig trees and pomegranates, a land of olive oil, oil of olive? Is that what that says? Huh. That was a copy and paste too, so whoever made that translation messed that up. Anyway, a land of olive oil and honey. A land in which you shall eat bread without sacredness. You will not lack anything in it. Does that sound like a pretty good land? Yeah. A land whose stones are iron, and out of whose hills you may dig copper. So it had all kinds of good stuff for them. This is their promised land. God promised this land to them because it was a great and awesome land.